All right, guys. So we're back now to hit these poems we've got. We got four of them, and they're all interestingly the titles are all names. And honestly, I have only studied one of these before I taught him this year, and that was Richard Cory, which I don't know if it's my favorite of them, but I love it. It may be. It's between that one and the final one, the one Richard Bone. Those two I really like. I will tell you the first one is not my favorite, and it's really because it's just a little bit on the confusing side with some of what happens, while the other three I think are very simple and have a very strong central message. This first one, Luke Havergal, I feel like does not. Okay? So here's the thing with poetry, what I've taught in my classes before. Poetry most of the time is going to have some sort of theme. The last three poems in this section have a very strong, definite theme. There's several options for themes, actually. There's one that I feel like would fit him best, but of course there's other smaller ones you can use too. The other thing that poetry often does is it takes and tries to allow you to feel a certain sensation, okay? And I honestly think this first one, Luke Havergal, is really about seeing what despair someone feels after losing someone close to them. I really feel like that's the main driving thing in this, because the message in it, I'm not really able to nail one down that I feel like I'm competent saying that's it, okay? So if you look at Luke Havergal, what you really seem to have, let's look at the first little bit. I'm not going to read all these poems to you, okay? In fact, you guys can follow Luke Havergal. It's on page 643, or you can look it up online. Just type it in Luke Havergal, and you'll probably find it. It's very short. It's about 32 lines. We get in the first stanza, we get this idea about the western gate. It's in the first line. And then we get the twilight. We talk about leaves falling. There's a little bit about the end. You get this. And remember, poems love playing with time, and the sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. Those types of images are really common in poetry, and we get that here. We get this idea that the titular character here, Luke Havergal, is being told by a speaker who's unnamed, and there's a little bit of confusion about who that could be, but he's told to go to this western gate and listen for the call of someone. Now we're going to find out later this is probably his departed girlfriend, fiance, wife, whatever, but he's supposed to go and listen for her. You get the image that it's at twilight, which is going to be when it's dark, western gate where the sun sets, leaves falling. It's all imagery of endings, okay? The second stanza presents some beginnings, and it says that's not where to go. So it says, no, there's not a dawn in the eastern skies. That he's indicating, don't go to the east gate, go to the western gate. East is where there's beginnings, where the sun rises. The west is where things terminate, where they end, and that's where you're going to go. And then we get some really depressing imagery. We get the dark will end the dark. So this person's depressed. I think that second dark is referencing their feelings about losing this person. And when they say the dark will end that dark, honestly, it feels like it's leaning towards suicide, and that they want, that this speaker is telling this man, hey, if you really want to get back and see this person again and want to end your pain, then this is how you fix it. Now, it's really tempting to look at a poem like this and go, oh my goodness, this author is trying to tell people that if they're sad, kill themselves. That's not it. He's trying to let you see what a person like this is, because most of us have never, and I hope none of you have ever felt this depressed when you've lost someone, but it's hard to explain that to people. And so I think he's taking this as a way to try to drum that up in people and get them to feel what this depression must actually feel like. All right. We know that it's a ghost of some sort speaking to him because of the third stanza. When it says, out of a grave I come to tell you this, out of a grave I come to quench the kiss that flames upon your forehead with a glow that binds you to the way that you must go. We know that out of the grave, so we get the image that, this is a ghost. The obvious interpretation here is it's maybe the girl herself that's died, but that next line says, yes, there is yet but one way where she is. So then you get, maybe it's not. We can go in several directions here. Maybe it's some sort of spirit that's just trying to lead this person to, an evil spirit that's trying to lead them to do something awful. Maybe it's a more benevolent spirit that's just concerned about them and wants to help them in their pain. I don't really know from reading this, okay? Stanza 4 is just really an echo of stanza 1, except with a couple of minor differences that actually make a big difference. The beginning one said go to the western gate. This one says there is the western gate. So you get the image that this guy is actually on his way to the western gate, and at the beginning he's walking there, and at the end he's there. This is technically a narrative poem, so it's technically like progression here, like if it was a story. which also means that the theme is a little bit more wonky, to be obvious. I mean, to be honest with you. Um, what we get here is really about an analysis of what life means. The life of those we love, our own life, that sort of thing. It gets you into a discussion about that, which makes it it's an interesting poem, but it's not nearly as good as the next one we're going to read, which is by the same author, honestly. If you'll flip over to the next page, you have Richard Cory. Richard Cory is a amazing poem. I've taught it in the past. Musicians have taken this as inspiration. They've written songs about this. It's just a really interesting concept. And basically what you got for the first three stanzas is this description of a guy who seems to have it all. Wealth, good looks, he's charming, people like him. It's the kind of thing we all dream to be, okay? And then you get to the fourth stanza, and I'm going to read this. You get, so on we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. So the so on we worked is the turning point. A lot of simpler poems, and by simple I don't mean stupid, I just mean more basic format, have a volta or turning point, which it's usually a conjunction, but the so on would work as this. So the first three stanzas are setting this up. Then you have, so this is what happened. They're saying the everyday people, struggle through their life. It says when they say they went without meat and cursed the bread, it means they're not happy with what they've got. They wish they had more. And then you get the last two lines. It says, and Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. So another poem about suicide, right? But here's the thing, and this is what I love about this one. This one hints at the idea that just because someone seems to have it all doesn't mean there's not something going on with them. We need to keep that in mind as we're going through our day-to-day lives, instead of immediately lashing out at people because of our own frustrations, realizing we don't know what everyone else is going through. It also helps us to realize that just because someone's wealthy or has what we think is everything, it doesn't mean they do. There's more to life than material possessions. And we get that through this story. It reminds me of such a tragic thing from when I was, a little younger, with Robin Williams, who, grew up watching this guy in various things, and he always seemed like a comedian and a clown and somebody that, had, so much, and the fact that he struggled with depression daily. I mean, we don't ever know. Depressed people don't always advertise it like many people do. This is not always a thing. And, a lot of the times, we need to be better at reaching out to people and trying to understand, or at least trying to put ourselves out there like, hey man, if something's going on, let me know. I'd love to be able to help you. We're so tied up with our own stuff, sometimes we don't realize that, struggling is not a lower class, upper class, middle class type of struggle. It's just a human struggle. All right. Okay, so that's Richard Cory. I could talk hours about Richard Cory, but let's move to these two Edgar Lee Masters poems. Brand new to me, and man, do I ever love them. I wish they had been in my catalog before. So our first one, Lucinda Matlock, basically it's going to the first 15 lines, and really you could go the first 18 lines, but the first 15 for sure, just present a long-lived life, especially in this time period. This woman makes it to 96. She talks about all the stuff she's done. It's a very, simple, average life. There's nothing spectacular about it. She's married for 70 years. That's kind of spectacular. She has 12 kids, and 8 of them die, which today would definitely be, either one of those two would be spectacular. In that time period, probably not as rare, but still it's pretty, a big detail. But then, man, what you get to the ending here, she actually says that she passed away, and that's all. So we know she's dead. So we're getting, again, a voice from the grave. But this one's giving us a lesson, a message. She says, what is this I hear of sorrow and weariness, anger, discontent, and drooping hopes? Degenerate sons and daughters, life is too strong for you. It takes life to love life. I absolutely love the message that this woman's containing. And it makes me think about, I'm a teacher, so I see students all the time griping about their lives. Griping about, having to come to school, griping about, all sorts of different things. And this woman points out that all of this complaining, all the sorrow and weariness, anger, discontent, all of the things that seem to envelop us these days. She says that it's wrong. We aren't getting out there and living our lives. She says, if you really want to love life, you have to do something. You have to get out and live it. Slogging through day to day and never putting in anything but the bare minimum is you're gonna hate life because you don't have anything to be excited about. So that's what you have to do. And even though this is why the description of her life is so important, it's not a unique life. It's not like she did anything special, but she lived her life. She didn't spend it sitting on the couch staring at her phone screen. Okay, I realize the time period is different. I understand that, but she's out there doing things and living it. And then when she dies, she feels like her life was fulfilled. Your life is never going to be fulfilled by a phone screen or a controller. It's those are great things to pass time when you have it, but the relationships you build, the conversations you have, those are the things that are going to make your life feel full. And if you don't ever get to that point of your life, well, then your complaints are really not, they just don't have value, because your situation is your own making. So really pretty poem. I love it. Okay, then we get Richard Bone at the end, and the term, his name there of all of these, and I don't think any of the other ones really would have any special meaning in the title, but the term bone here is particular when you find out what this guy does. Which I never thought about this as a job choice. This man's job was to chisel in like dates and phrases and whatever people want on their tombstone. Which what a somber job to have. So the term bone indicating, how that would link up. So that's kind of a fitting term. He points out about, moving to this town and not knowing people, and them all giving him different things to carve into their loved ones' tombstones. And they have things like, he says while he's carving things, they always give them statements like, he was so kind, or he was wonderful, she was the sweetest woman, my favorite, he was a consistent Christian. That feels like such a bland comment. But he lists all of those, and he points out that these don't really sum up the truth about these people. In fact, I use the example in class that I often, when I worked for the church that I worked for 6 years, we would often do funerals for people who, their family member went to the church, but maybe this person didn't. And a lot of the time they were really angry and, not well-liked people. And, people would get up there and talk about them at the funeral and say all these nice things about them. And, you knew deep down that was all a bunch of hokum. None of that was true. But, people say that because it makes them feel better. And he's realizing that. And he's kind of like being critical about it. Then he realizes the longer he lives there, how important this is to people. Now, if he stopped there, that's still kind of a cool poem. But then you have this like line break, and you get this little small section at the bottom. He says, "But still I chiseled whatever they paid me to chisel, and made myself party to the false chronicles of the stones." I love that. He's like, he goes ahead and does it and he knows it's a lie. But I mean, you got to think, if you were to walk around a cemetery where every tombstone had an epitaph of some sort on it, it would make it sound like there's just nothing but good people that died here. And the fact is that people are much more complex than that. They may have been a really kind person to the people they knew. I have plenty of relatives who were very kind to their family and were very kind to, people they considered their people. But, if someone else that they felt like was an outsider was around, they would treat them like garbage. And so are they really a good person? I mean, there's questions like that come up, because we're more complex than a small phrase on a tombstone, and the way you see me may be very different than the way someone else sees me. So it's really not as simple. But then the real interesting part of this, and I'm going to try my best not to wander too much, we're already at 13 minutes, is he says, even as the historian does, who writes without knowing the truth or because he is influenced to hide it. There's your message. It's really like, just like these, we're using an analogy here, just like this man who carves, what people want people to believe about them into their tombstone. He says historians do the same thing. And guys, it is a really dangerous and contentious topic to get into this, but he's 100% right. We have our versions of history, and rarely are they 100% true. You think about like our founding fathers, great men, but not perfect men by any stretch, and yet we have elevated them to deities in our minds. George Washington's a sacred cow that no one can touch. You can't say anything negative about George Washington, or obviously you hate America. Well, here you go. Let me give you some information about him. George Washington, not the greatest general that ever lived, despite what people say. Man lost as many or more battles than he won, spent a lot of time running away, and yet we treat him as like the greatest general that ever lived. And he's a great man, but he was a flawed person. But our history books have a way of making some people really look shiny and villainizing others to an extreme degree, and that's kind of what the point he's making here. And you got to think, this was written right after the Civil War. So again, this author may be pointing to some of the things that it just, and by the way, let me just point this out. This is not his history or historian's fault. You can't cover everything. And obviously we just can't help that we're biased to some ideas and opinions. And even if you try not to lean into those, you're still going to do it, even if it's just by the things you neglect to put in the history books. All right. So But the smart thing here, and the message I think in here, is to realize that's the case and to be honest about things. You can say your country is flawed without people accusing you of hating your country. All right, there are problems in America. The U.S. has a lot of issues. I could do 12 video series, an hour each, on issues in this country. It doesn't mean it's not a great place. It doesn't mean if I say that I don't think it's the greatest country in the world, but I think it's a good one. It doesn't mean I will pack up and leave. Why don't you go to Afghanistan then? I don't want to live in Afghanistan. I didn't say it was better. I would say that we have a lot of issues, and being honest about issues, whether it's countrywide or as we see in this poem, whether it's with individuals, being honest about who we are is key. You can't change something unless you're honest with yourself about it. It's like with Alcoholics Anonymous. You can't fix a problem unless you admit it's a problem. Okay, so we got to realize where these problems are and allow ourselves to not be perfect. Allow imperfection to exist, and tackle areas we can, and some things we just have to let go. We're going to have flaws as a country, as individuals. So yeah, great poem. The thing that makes poems great to me is that I can have a conversation afterwards. I like looking at things like, I would say the language in Luke Havergal is probably the prettiest of the four, but it doesn't give me the discussion as much. We could get into a discussion about suicide, but goodness gracious, that's a little dark. The other three all provide avenues to get into a really good conversation about relevance to today, and I think if you want to be considered literary, that's what you need. Okay? All right, guys. Well, that will end our poems, and that should get me caught back up. Tomorrow, I plan on posting our last selection, which is going to be a Wagner matinee. And yes, I know it's with a W. Remember, we're talking about a German composer, so it's pronounced a little differently. We're going to do that tomorrow, which is also a new piece for me, but I absolutely love it. So I'm excited about talking about that. I will still go back and do To Build a Fire, and it will be posted at some point. I apologize for the delay there. I thought I had already done the video. So, oops. Okay. So anyway, I hope you guys are having a great day. This is going to be us kind of wrapping up the unit. This is a long unit. There's going to be a lot on this test coming up. So make sure you've got your notes down. Make sure you understand everything. And if you don't, you know what to do. Send me an email. Let me know that there's an issue, and we'll get into it. All right. Okay, guys. Well, you guys have a wonderful night, and I will see you for our next and our final selection.